Hey guys, and I'm back with more Masonic secrets. Mandate for blind obedience. The first duty of every Mason is to obey the mandate of the Master. This spirit of instant obedience and submission to authority constitutes the great safeguard of the institution. Freemasonry more resembles a military than a political organization. The order must at once be obeyed. Its character and its consequences may be matters of subsequent inquiry. The Masonic rule of obedience is like the nautical imperative. Obey orders, even if you break owners. The first 3 degrees of Freemasonry are known as the Blue Lodge. After completing the 3rd degree, a Mason can move upward along 2 paths, known as the York Rite and the Scottish Rite. The Blue Lodge, however, forms the foundation of all Masonry, and most Masons never proceed beyond the 3rd degree or Master Mason degree. With such being the case, most Masons never learn the secrets above the Blue Lodge or the true nature of Freemasonry. I wonder if that's true. Since the Master Mason degree forms the basis for advancement and is occupied by the vast majority of all Masons, it is given in its full form following the obligations of the first 2 degrees. Entered Apprentice, 1st degree. To all of which I do most solemnly and sincerely promise and swear, without the least equivocation, mental reservation, or self-evasion of mind in me whatever, bonding myself under no less penalty than to have my throat cut across, my tongue torn out by the roots, and my body buried in the rough sands of the sea at low water mark, where the tide ebbs and flows since in 24 hours. So help me God, and keep me steadfast in the due performance of the same. So their first pledge is like a pledge of, they're going to get murdered if they reveal the secrets of their little crazy brainwashing cult. Fellowcraft, 2nd degree. These several points I solemnly swear to observe without evasion, equivocation, or mental reservation of any kind, under no less a penalty on the violation of any of them than that of having my left breast laid open, my heart plucked out, and given to the ravenous birds of the air, or devouring beasts of the field as a prey. So help me God, and keep me steadfast in the solemn obligation of a fellow craft Freemason. So these people are a little bit sick in the head. This is, these people are like psychopaths. Definitely murderers, killers, sickos. Master Mason degree, 3rd degree. I blank, they put their name, of my own free will and accord, in the presence of Almighty God, and this worshipful lodge of Master Masons, erected to God and dedicated to the Holy Order of St. John, do hereby and hereon most solemnly and sincerely promise and swear, in addition to my former obligations, that I will not give the degree of Master Mason to any one of an inferior degree, nor to any one in the known world, except it be to a true and lawful brother or brethren Master Mason, or within the body of a just and lawfully constituted lodge of such, and not unto him nor unto them whom I shall hear so to be, but unto him and them only whom I shall find so to be, after strict trial and due examination, or lawful information received. Furthermore, do I promise and swear that I will not give the Master's word, which I shall hereafter receive neither in the lodge nor out of it, except it be on the 5 points of fellowship, and then not above my breath. Furthermore, do I promise and swear that I will not give the grand hailing sign of distress, except I am in real distress, or for the benefit of the craft when at work. Or should I ever see that sign given, or hear the word accompanying it, and the person who gave it appearing to be in distress, I will fly to his relief at the risk of my life, should there be a greater probability of saving his life than of losing my own. Furthermore, do I promise and swear that I will not wrong this lodge, nor a brother of this degree, to the value of 1 cent knowingly, myself, nor suffer it to be done by others, if in my power to prevent. Furthermore, do I promise and swear that I will not be at the initiating, passing, and raising a candidate at one communication, without a regular dispensation from the Grand Lodge for the same. Furthermore, do I promise and swear that I will not be at the initiating, passing, or raising a candidate in a clandestine lodge, I knowing it to be such. Furthermore, do I promise and swear that I will not be at the initiating of an old man in dotage, a young man in nonage, an atheist, irreligious libertine, idiot, madman, hermaphrodite, nor woman. Oh, you can't be a tranny. Furthermore, transsexual, pardon me. Furthermore, do I promise and swear that I will not speak evil of a brother Master Mason, neither behind his back nor before his face, but will apprise him of all approaching danger if in my power. Furthermore, do I promise and swear that I will not violate the chastity of a Master Mason's wife, mother, sister, or daughter, I knowing them to be such, nor suffer it to be done by others, if in my power to prevent it. Furthermore, do I promise and swear that I will support the Constitution of the Grand Lodge of the State of, fill in the blank, under which this lodge is held, and conform to all the bylaws, rules, and regulations of this or any other lodge, of which I may at any time hereafter become a member. Furthermore, do I promise and swear that I will obey all regular signs, summons, or tokens, given, handed, sent, or thrown to me, from the hand of another brother Master Mason, or from the body of a just and lawfully constituted lodge of such, provided it be within the length of my cable tow. Furthermore, do I promise and swear that a Master Mason's secrets, given to me in charge as such, and I knowing them to be such, shall remain as secure and inviolable in my breast as in his own, murder and treason excepted, and they left to my own election. Furthermore, do I promise and swear that I will go on a Master Mason's errand whenever required, even should I have to go barefoot and bareheaded, if within the length of my cable tow. Furthermore, do I promise and swear that I will always remember a brother Master Mason when on my knees. Oh, that sounds weird. Offering up my devotions to Almighty God. Furthermore, do I promise and swear that I will be aiding and assisting all poor, indigent Master Masons, their wives and orphans, wheresoever disposed around the globe, as far as in my power, without injuring myself or family materially. Furthermore, do I promise and swear that if any part of this solemn oath or obligation be omitted at this time, that I will hold myself amenable thereto, whenever informed. To all which I do most solemnly promise and swear, with a fixed and steady purpose of mind in me, to keep and perform the same, bonding myself, under no less penalty than to have my body severed in two in the midst, and divided to the north and south, my bowels burnt to ashes in the center, and the ashes scattered before the four winds of heaven, that there might not be the least track or trace or of remembrance remain among men or masons, of so vile and perjured a wretch as I should be, were I ever to prove willfully guilty of violating any part of this my solemn oath or obligation of a Master Mason. So help me God, and keep me steadfast in the due performance of the same. So yeah, they threaten to murder each other if they reveal any of their little evil secrets. Note, that's why they have to make the threats, the death threats, because they're up to no good, and they don't want no one to know, so they got to scare everybody into not giving up their evil little secrets by threatening to murder them. Wow, that sounds like friends you want to hang with, huh? Note, some variations in the above ritual will exist between jurisdictions and countries, but each variation will be recognized around the world in a duly constituted lodge. Exceptions exist, as denotes the so-called Black African Lodge. These lodges were created to appease pressure from the black community and to maintain a Masonic influence within the black community. Hear that, black folks? They're just trying to appease you. Freemasonry, however, has never recognized black masonry as being legitimate. This prejudicial attitude gave rise to the creation of the Ku Klux Klan in 1867. As a Masonic order, the KKK was created from an existing order known as the Knights of the Golden Circle, renamed to be called the Knights of the Ku Klux Klan. This new order provided a secret and subversive mechanism for the ongoing control and persecution of blacks in North America after the Civil War, U.S. Civil War. The creation of the KKK as a Masonic order helps to explain why blacks traditionally receive a greater conviction rate and harsher sentencing in the courtroom. Reverend Finney adds insight into this example of Masonic prejudice from his book, The Charter, Claims, and Practical Workings of Freemasonry. Hear that, black folks? The reason you spend more time in jail and get higher sentences is because all the Mason judges and lawyers. Sometime since the Grand Lodge of the state of New York adopted a series of articles defining certain landmarks and principles of Freemasonry. These articles have been accepted and eulogized by the Masonic press. The first is as follows. I quote it from the American Freemasons, edited by Robert Morris, a Knights Templar, and author of various Masonic works. These articles Mr. Morris regards as high Masonic authority. The number from which I quote is dated at Louisville, Kentucky, 8th of April, 5854, Masonic date. In other words, in 1854, 14 years ago. Our New York brethren are eminent for the matchless ability with which their Grand Lodge documents are prepared. In this department, they have set the example for others, and there are yet a few that would do well to look to the east for more light. We copy their 34 articles with some condensation and a few comments of our own, and present them to our readers as a well-digested system of Masonic law and practice. Article 1. It is not proper to initiate into our lodges persons of the Negro race, and their exclusion is in accordance with Masonic law and the ancient charters and regulations. Because of their depressed social condition, their general want of intelligence, these are insulting, which unfits them as a body to work in or adorn the craft, the impropriety of making them our equals in one place, when from their social condition and the circumstances which almost everywhere attach to them, we cannot do so in others, their not being, as a general think, freeborn, the impossibility, or at least the difficulty, of ascertaining, if we once commence, their free birth, and where the line of intelligence and social elevation commences and ends, or divides portions of their race, and finally, their not being as a race persons of good report, or who can be well recommended as subjects for initiation. Remember, these aren't my words, I'm just reading these words. They're very seldom being persons who have any trade, estate, office, occupation, or visible way of acquiring an honest livelihood and working in the craft, as becomes members of this ancient and most honorable fraternity, who ought not only to earn what is sufficient for themselves and families, but likewise something to spare for works of charity and for supporting the ancient grandeur and dignity of the royal craft, eating no man's bread for naught, and their general positive deficiency of natural endowments, all which would render it impossible, as a general thing, to conciliate and continue between them and us goodwill and private affection or brotherly love, which cements into one united body the members of this ancient fraternity. Article 2. No person of the Negro race shall be examined or admitted as a visitor of any lodge of Masons under this jurisdiction, if made in an African lodge in North America, because all such lodges are clandestine and without legal authority. Masonry not only is not a moral organization, it is also very selective about those who can join. Masonry claims to be the way to gain entrance into the celestial lodge above, yet many people are denied admission to the Masonic Lodge. Anderson, 32-degree Mason, mentions that Freemasonry is available to any man of good character who believes in a supreme being. There are no restrictions relating to race, creed, or color. That sort of contradicts what I just said earlier. Well, what I read. Hutchinson tells us it is necessary that a candidate for Masonry should be able to declare that he is the son of a free woman. This excludes the slaves, Wilmshurst declares. The true candidate must indeed be a white man. American blacks have been, in general, excluded from Masonic membership. However, there is a group of Negro Masons known as Prince Hall Masonry. I don't think anybody should be joining Masonry, no matter what their race is. That's a blessing in a way, when you think about it. You don't want to be a part of no evil club. Although essentially the same, the rituals for the first 3 blue degrees vary in small ways from state to state in the USA. In most states, the wording here includes white, for Negroes and women are entirely excluded from the Masonic Brotherhood. There is a Negro Masonic system called the Prince Hall Lodge, but it is not associated in any way with white Freemasonry. It is referred to as clandestine Masonry and is considered by the rest of Masonry to be spurious, illegitimate imitation. But how do Masons justify this form of racial discrimination today? They usually don't try to. When confronted with Masonry's historic rejection of blacks, most Masons will deny it and say that there are blacks in Masonry. But what they are referring to, although they won't want to tell you, is the entirely separate black Masonic system called Prince Hall Masonry. What is Prince Hall Masonry? Prince Hall Masonry is the Masonic system for blacks. It is exactly like white Masonry, with the same rituals, same secrets, all the same systems for higher degrees. It has its own shrine and the same adoptive others, i.e. Eastern Star, Rainbow Girls, etc. It also has its own problems, including the same pagan roots. Doesn't this mean that Masonry is open to blacks? Definitely not. Freemasonry, the legitimate system, looks upon Prince Hall Masonry as counterfeit, an illegitimate imitation of the real thing. Prince Hall Masonry is classified as clandestine Masonry, one of the things in which a Master Mason swears to take no part under penalty of death. How did Prince Hall Masonry come to exist? It all seems to have begun with a black named Prince Hall. The exact history is hazy, but it is probably true that the British Army, for reasons of its own, authorized Prince Hall and 13 other black men to organize a lodge called African Lodge in Boston. This lodge, not recognized by the Grand Lodge of Massachusetts, refused to acknowledge any allegiance to that Grand Lodge and continued to operate in some form until the death of Prince Hall and his colleagues. In 1827, the system was revived. Receiving no recognition from the Grand Lodge of England, the men decided to acknowledge no Masonic authority but their own. They decided that, with what knowledge they possessed of Masonry, and as people of color by themselves, they were, and not by rights to be, free and independent of other lodges. From this beginning, a complete Masonic system developed and spread to Canada, Liberia, and other foreign countries. This elaborate Masonic system, a perfect parallel with white legitimate Masonry, is still classified as illegitimate, clandestine, and off limits to all white Masons. It is interesting but not surprising that the same attitude of superiority and spirit of snobbery exist among Prince Hall Masons toward those blacks outside the lodge system, which has prevailed among white Masons towards blacks and others outside of its confines. People are, after all, people. Are there ever exceptions in local lodges to these rules of exclusion of membership? Yes, there are, but there are definitely exceptions and not the rule. I was told by one Mason in New York that his lodge had taken in a black man, and I'm sure that it has happened elsewhere. Because of changes in social mores and political pressures, change seems inevitable, and the resulting social adjustments will be increasingly painful, emotional, and divisive. Looming before Masonry as a whole is a growing problem of enormous proportions. For example, the Grand Lodge of West Virginia recently issued an edict forbidding members of the most worshipful Grand Lodge of West Virginia, ancient, free, and accepted Masons, to visit lodges under the Grand Lodges of 7 northern and western states because of their openness to recognizing Prince Hall as legitimate Prince Hall Masonry. In 1976, a Masonic affiliate organization for girls, the International Order of the Rainbow, suspended all Iowa chapters of the group because one local chapter endorsed membership of a 12-year-old black girl. According to press reports, Michelle Palmer, whose father is white and mother is black, had been invited to join the Rainbow chapter in Indianola, Iowa, was approved by the local assembly in October of that year. However, officials at the Rainbow's international headquarters at McAllister, Oklahoma, ruled that all 136 Rainbow assemblies in Iowa must disband by the end of the year because they did not follow rules and regulations. It was explained that the organization took disciplinary action on the basis of an unwritten law which excludes blacks from membership. Sworn to persecute. Back in 1869, Reverend Charles Finney exposed the Masonic obligation to persecute any who would oppose or challenge the Masonic secret society. Masons are sworn to persecute until death anyone who violates Masonic obligation. In the oath of the thrice illustrious Order of the Cross, the candidate swears as follows: You further swear that should you know another to violate any essential point of this obligation, you will use your most decided endeavors, by the blessing of God, to bring such person to the strictest and most condign punishment, agreeably to the rules and usages of our ancient fraternity, and this by pointing him out to the world as an unworthy vagabond, by opposing his interest, by deranging his business, by transferring his character after him wherever he may go, and by exposing him to the contempt of the whole fraternity and of the world during his whole natural life. The penalty of this obligation is as follows: To all and every part thereof we then bind you, and by ancient usage you bind yourself, under the no less infamous penalty than dying the death of a traitor. Wow, that's funny that they say. That's funny that they consider other people traitors when they're the fucking ones betraying their country and their people. By having a spear or other sharp instrument, like our Divine Master, thrust into your left side, bearing testimony, even in death, to the power and justice of the mark of the Holy Cross. Here we have an explanation of the notorious fact that Freemasons try in every way to ruin the reputation of all who renounce Masonry. The air has almost been darkened by the immense number of falsehoods that have been circulated by Freemasons to destroy the reputation of every man who has renounced Freemasonry and published it to the world, who has written against it. No pains have been spared to destroy all confidence in the testimony of such men. Does not this oath render impossible for us to believe what Freemasons say of the character of those who violate their obligations? Who of us that lived 40 years ago does not remember how Freemasons endeavored to destroy the reputation of William Morgan, of Elder Bernard, of Elder Stearns, and also of Mr. Allen, and who that is at all acquainted with facts, does not know that the utmost pains are taken to destroy the reputation of every man that dares take his pen and expose their institution. Such false representations are just what we are to expect. If Freemasons of this and the higher degrees fulfill their vows, why should they be believed And how can they complain of us for not believing what they say of men who have renounced Masonry and oppose it? It is merely folly and madness to believe them. It is not difficult, if Freemasons desire it, to produce almost any amount of testimony to prove that every manner and degree of falsehood is resorted to destroy the testimony of men who witness against them. Any man who will renounce these horrid oaths and expose their profanity to the public should make up his mind beforehand to endure any amount of slander and prosecution which the ingenuity of Freemasons can invent. In the degree of Knights Adepts of the Eagle or Sun, Light on Masonry, we have the following. The man peeping, be the man you saw peeping, and who was discovered and seized, and conducted to death, is an emblem of those who come to be initiated into our sacred mysteries, through a motive of curiosity, and if so, indiscreet as to divulge their obligations. We are bound to cause their death, and take vengeance on the treason by the destruction of the traitors. Here we find that Freemasons of this and the higher degrees are solemnly pledged to destroy the lives of those who violate their obligations. Deacon William A. Bartlett of Pella, Iowa, in his public renunciation of Freemasonry says, "During the winter or spring following my initiation, a resolution was offered in the lodge for adoption and to be published outside the lodge, condemning the abduction of Morgan. After much discussion, the worshipful master called another to the chair and said, 'Brethren, what do you mean by offering such a resolution as this? Had we been at Batavia, we would not... Had we been at Batavia, we would have done just what those brethren have done, and taken life of Morgan.'" The following is taken from the Secret Teachings of the Masonic Lodge by John Ankerberg and John Weldon. From the initiation of the 10th degree of the Scottish Rite, I do promise and swear upon the Holy Bible to keep exactly in my heart all the secrets that shall be revealed to me. And in failure of this obligation, I consent to have my body opened perpendicularly, and to be exposed for 8 hours to the open air, that the venomous flies may eat of my entrails, my head to be cut off, and put on the highest pinnacle of the world. And I will always be ready to inflict the same punishment on those who shall disclose this degree and break this obligation. So may God help and maintain me. Amen. The sign of this oath is to place the point of the poniard under the chin and draw it downward to the waist, as if in the act of ripping open the abdomen. From the initiation of the 14th degree of the Scottish Rite, I do most solemnly and sincerely swear on the Holy Bible, and in the presence of the Grand Architect of the universe, never to reveal the mysteries of this our sacred and high degree. If in failure of this, my obligation, I consent to have my belly cut open, my bowels torn from thence, and given to the hungry vultures. The initiation discourse by the Grand Orator also states, to inflict vengeance on traitors, and to punish perfidy and injustice. From the 17th degree of the Scottish Rite, I, fill in your name, do promise and solemnly swear and declare in the awful presence of the only one, most holy, puissant, almighty, and most merciful Grand Architect of the heaven and earth, that I will never reveal to any person, whomsoever, below me, the secrets of this degree, which is now about to be communicated to me, under the penalty of not only being dishonored, but to consider my life as the immediate forfeiture, and that to be taken from me, with all the torture and pains to be inflicted, in manner as I have consented to in the preceding degrees. During this ritual, the AII Puscian teaches the skull is the image of a brother who is excluded from a lodge or council. The cloth stained with blood, that we should not hesitate to spill ours for the good of masonry. From the 18th degree of the Scottish Rite. Master, 7 raps. All rise, and candidate is conducted to and caused to kneel on the step to the altar with his right hand on the Bible. I, fill in the blank, do solemnly and sincerely promise and swear, under the penalty of all my former obligations, which I have taken in the preceding degrees, never to reveal directly or indirectly the secrets or mysteries of this degree, under the penalty of being forever deprived of the true world, to be perpetually in darkness. My blood continually running from my body, to suffer without intermission the cruel remorse of soul, that the bitterest gall mixed with vinegar be my constant drink, the sharpest thorns for my pillow, and that the death of the cross may complete my punishment, should I ever infringe or violate in any manner or form the laws and rules which have been, are now, or may be thereafter made known or prescribed to me. And I do furthermore swear, promise, and engage on my sacred word of honor to observe and obey all the degrees which may be transmitted to me by the Grand Inspectors General and Supreme Council of the 33rd degree. So help me God, and keep me steadfast in this my stolen obligation. From the 28th degree of the Scottish Rite. I, fill in the blank, promise and swear in the presence of the great architect of the universe, never to reveal any of the secrets of the degrees of the Knights of the Sun. Should I willfully violate this to my obligation, may my brethren seize me and thrust my tongue through with a red-hot iron, to pluck out my eyes and deprive me of smelling and seeing, to put off my hands and expose me in that condition in the field to be devoured by the voracious animals, and if none can be found, may the lightning of heaven execute me with the same vengeance. From the 30th degree of the Scottish Rite. During the taking of this oath, the Grand Provost of Justice holds the point of his sword to the heart of the candidate. I, fill in the blank, of my own free will and accord, do hereby solemnly and sincerely promise sincerely promise and swear to keep faithful the secret of the sublime degree of Knights Kadosh, and strictly to obey the statutes of the order, all of which I promise to do under the penalty of death. When your rashness prompted you to enter this awful sanctuary, you were no doubt informed of the danger which threatened you, and of the trials which still await you. Swear, therefore, upon your word of honor, never to reveal what you have been seen or heard hitherto. Forget not that the slightest indiscretion will cost you your life. Are you still willing to proceed? These guys like to threaten to murder other people so they can control them. That's how slavery works. They use violence and threats to get their slaves to obey. The Knight Kadosh, 30th degree, symbolizes the fraternity's raging battle against church and state. The Grand Master approaches the table on which there are 3 skulls. One is adorned with a papal tiara, a second with a regal crown, and the third is fastened with a laurel wreath. The Grand Master stabs the skull with the papal tiara as the candidate repeats, "Down with imposture." Down with crime. The master and the candidate then kneel before the skull adorned with the laurel leaf and say, everlasting glory to the immortal martyr of virtue. Passing to the crowded skull, the pair chant, down with tyranny, down with crime. The candidate takes a second oath to strive unceasingly for the overthrow of superstition, fanaticism, imposture, and intolerance. He takes a third oath in which he accepts the consents to undergo the sentence which may be pronounced against me by the dreaded thumb tribunal, which I hereby acknowledge as my supreme judge. The fourth oath taken by a Knight Kadash focuses again on the cruel and cowardly pontiff who sacrificed to his ambitions the illustrious order of those Knights Templar of whom we are the true successors. Then all present trample upon the papal tiara as they shout down with imposture. In the 31st degree, the candidate agrees that the Masonic ideal of justice is more lofty than the actualities of God. The 32nd degree teaches that Masonry will eventually rule the world. Wow, that sounds like fun. The following is taken from Freemasonry, The Invisible Cult in Our Midst, by Jack Harris, pages 51 and 52. From the Knights of Malta, after taking the upper part of a human skull in the hand, the following penalty is repeated after the Grand Commander. This pure wine I now take in testimony of my belief in the mortality of the body and the immortality of the soul. And may this libation appear as a witness against me, both here and hereafter. Immortality of the soul. May this libation appear as a witness against me, both here and thereafter. And as the sins of the world were laid upon the head of the Savior, so may all the sins committed by the person whose skull this was beheaded upon my head, in addition to my own, should I ever knowingly or willingly violate or transgress any obligation that I have heretofore taken, take all this time, or shall at any future period take in relation to any degree of masonry or order of knighthood. From the Shrine, the ancient Arabic order, nobles in the mystic shrine. In willful violation thereof, I may incur the fearful penalty of having my eyeballs pierced to the center with a 3/8 blade, my feet flayed, and I be forced to walk the hot shots. Albert McKinney, in Encyclopedia of Freemasonry, page 750, states that the sword pointing to the heart is to indicate that punishment would duly follow a violation. The murder of Captain William Morgan. William Morgan was a U.S. captain during the War of 1812 and had been practicing the craft for 30 years. After converting to the Christian faith, he renounced his involvement in Freemasonry. Morgan had become aware that the Illuminati had infiltrated North American Freemasonry and knew of its plans to take over the governments in North America. With his personal involvement and his knowledge, he began publication of a book exposing the Illuminati in the first 3 degrees of Freemasonry. The following information was written by John Daniel in his introduction of Reverend Charles Finney's book, The Character, Claims, and Practical Workings of Freemasonry. What makes the following so unique is that it conveys the essence of the workings of the secret societies in a contemporary manner, exposing the true nature of Freemasonry, how it takes otherwise decent individuals to compromise their nature in the same way that it compromises justice in our courtrooms. William Morgan broke his Masonic code of silence and paid the penalty with his life. On Wednesday, September 20th, 1826, he was murdered by 3 Masons. 22 years later, one of the 3 made a deathbed confession. That confession is printed in Finney's book, on pages 6 to 10. In 1826, and the year following, there was a general consensus among Masons that Morgan was indeed killed as penalty for his crimes against the Brotherhood. How or when Morgan was killed, and what Mason or Masons were honored with the task, was not known by the majority of Lodge brothers. But, like the Niagara River in which he was drowned, rumors flowed endlessly among them. Following are 4 such rumors. Elias Wilder of Elba, New York, himself not a Mason, said that 2 or 3 weeks before William Morgan was carried from Batavia, I had a conversation with Freemason Cyrus Grout on the subject of Morgan's attempt to publish the secrets of Masonry. Mr. Grout told me that the Masons had sent to the Grand Lodge of New York for instructions, and when they got word from them there would be something done. After the abduction of Morgan, Mr. Wilder had another conversation with Cyrus Grout on the subject of what had become of Morgan. And Grout said to him, Morgan was gone a fishing on the Niagara River of Lake Ontario. A Mason by the name of William Terry of Niagara County was told by a fraternity brother that Morgan was taken and carried away, had been killed, and sunk into Lake Ontario. Mr. Terry also stated that word came from the New York Grand Lodge that those engaged in the murder of Morgan, if indicted, were to be kept harmless, and that all expense requests to pay them Mr. Terry also stated that word came from the New York Grand Lodge that those engaged in the murder of Morgan, if indicted, were to be kept harmless, and that all expense requisites to pay any fines that might be imposed was to be defrayed by the Grand Lodge, and that the actors in the affair of the abduction of Morgan so acted in obedience to orders coming from Grand Lodge. Mason Sylvester Hathaway of Niagara County wasn't told by Masons of Niagara County, was told by another Mason that 2 ruffians had taken him, Morgan, out and cut his throat, tied his body to a rope and stone, threw it into a lake. Luther Wilder of the same city stated that he would not be afraid to bet $1,000 that Morgan was not in the land of the living, that he had taken a voyage on Lake Ontario without float or boat and would never be seen again by any human being. Many decent men of the Order of Masons justified the murder of Morgan by saying that efforts to learn the fate of Morgan would be useless, and that if they had done anything with him, it was no one's business but their own. These quotes are taken from depositions made on March 9, 1827, by Justice of the Peace Andrew Dibble of Genesee County, New York. Mr. Dibble was one of several of J.P. Morgan's, several J.P.'s, to whom 38 Dibble was one of several J.P.'s to whom 38 law-abiding citizens took witnesses after forming committees to conduct an independent investigation into the abduction and murder of Morgan. Citizens of the land of the free and the home of the brave were forced to take action because the proper authorities delayed, botched, or hid evidence. To the man, these proper authorities were Masons, obeying orders from the Grand Lodge of New York while disobeying the laws of the land. 7 citizen committees in as many countries were established to investigate these crimes. For nearly a year, they took leave of their jobs and paid their own expenses to return justice to our land. In stark contrast, Freemasonry used civil servants and public funds to obstruct justice. Upon completion of their investigations, the citizens presented their evidence and demanded action. The number of Masons directly involved in the abduction, murder, and cover-up of these crimes was at least 136. 136. 36. That's 3 sixes, 666. They were not all from the same locality, but scattered along 100 miles of countryside. They worked in perfect concert, a daring and criminal scheme, without incurring the risk of full conviction or punishment. Many were of respectable character, yet their reputation came second to their primary obligation of obeying their diabolical Masonic oaths. All that was necessary to conceal Morgan's kidnapping and murder was the Masonic partially found in oaths taken in the first 3 degrees of Freemasonry, as well as the oaths taken in the Royal Arch and Knights Templar degrees. In the first 3 degrees, the oaths forbid Blue Lodge Masons from divulging criminal acts of Brother Masons, with the exception of murder and treason. The Royal Arch and Knights Templar oaths forbid Masons from divulging all criminal acts of their brother Masons, including murder and treason. The 136 Masons involved in the crime were of the later degrees. Evidence against Freemasonry was so compelling that it precipitated a mass exodus from the lodge. Of 50,000 Masons in the United States at the time, 45,000 withdrew their membership and renounced their oaths, forcing the closure of 2,000 lodges. Citizen investigators. These outrages extended over 6 counties. In this alarming emergency, the agents of government were paralyzed. The public institutions and provisions for the preservation of tranquility and the repression of crime seemed worthless. Therefore, in a move unprecedented in our nation's history, and in defiance of the most malignant, persevering, and ingenious counteraction by Freemasons, the citizens of New York took the matter into their own hands. At great expense of their own time and money, they suspended their private concerns and gave themselves up to all the labors of a complicated investigation. At every turn they met obstruction to justice. They could obtain no involuntary testimony. They received no assistance from public office. And in their travels, their lives were endangered. Still, they went on fearlessly and successfully, inquiring cautiously but persistently into all the circumstances of these most revolting crimes. Their sole purpose was to obtain enough evidence to be effective for the judicial exposure and punishment of the offenders. Yet, all the while, their motives were venomously slandered and their conduct bellied into the Masonic-controlled press. Such tenacity on the part of these citizens is indicative of the safety and prophetic of the perpetuity of our free institutions. In the end, the citizen investigators uncovered enough evidence to bring charges against individual Masons in the Masonic institution as a whole. However, the sheriffs in all the counties in which the deeds of violence against Morgan had been committed, whose duty it was under the laws of New York to select and summon the grand juries, were one and all Freemasons. Several had themselves been partly to the crime. Hence, they did not hesitate to make use of their power as officers of justice to screen the criminals from conviction. The jurors, most of them were Masons, with some of them participants in the crimes into which it became their civil duty to inquire. 5 years were consumed in attempting to obtain a legal conviction of the various offenders, but to no avail. Some of these suspected persons indeed stood trial, but it was a mockery of justice, for the secret obligation prevailed in the jury box. Consequently, they were one and all rescued in the moment of their utmost need. Others vanished from the scene and eluded pursuit, even to the farthest limits of the United States. The Masonic coroner, the one most guilty of perpetuating these offenses, was tracked to a lodge in New York City. From there, the citizen investigators discovered that Masons in that city secreted him aboard a vessel below the harbor and sent him into a foreign land, leaving his wife and children behind. Important witnesses were carried off at the moment when their evidence was indispensable and placed beyond the jurisdiction of the state. Those who were called to testify and actually did sit on the stand stood doggedly mute, or else they placed themselves entirely under the guidance of legal advisors employed to protect them from incriminating themselves. Important witnesses were carried off at the moment when their evidence was indispensable and placed beyond the jurisdiction of the state. Those who were called to testify and actually did sit on the stand stood doggedly mute, or else they placed themselves entirely under the guidance of legal advisors employed to protect them from incriminating themselves. All the while, distant lodges responded favorably to the call for aid in the defense of their endangered brethren by forwarding sums of money for the relief of the accused. The 69 Masons who actually participated in the abduction and murder of Captain William Morgan gradually dropped out of sight. So well hidden were they that it was the belief of all who were knowledgeable of these events that they lived and died outside of the United States. Secure from every danger or legal punishment. 22 years after the fact, one of the three who actually murdered Morgan made a deathbed confession, which is printed in detail in Finney's book. All persons engaged in these outrages were either Royal Arch Masons at the time of their crimes or made so immediately after their crimes. As such, they were obligated by oath to conceal and never reveal the crimes of a brother Mason, treason and murder not accepted. They knew full well the consequences should they disobey. Therefore, many Masons called as witnesses perjured themselves. Others were excused from testifying by alleging they would incriminate themselves. And yet, all those who were guilty of participating in the offenses were held up by the fraternity as heroes of fidelity to the duty and victims to the prejudices of their fellow citizens. To their dying day, they were still retained as worthy and cherished members of their beloved Freemasonry. One faithful and stable and able state officer, whose lawful duty was to investigate these offenses, officially reported on the proceedings in which he had been in charge. Difficulties which never occurred in any other prosecution have been met at every step. Witnesses have been secreted. They have been sent off into Canada and into different states of the Union. They have been apprised of process being issued to compel their attendance, have been thereby enabled to evade its service. In one instance, after a party implicated had been arrested and brought into the state, he was decoyed from the custody of the individual having him in charge and finally escaped. These occurrences have been so numerous and various as to forbid the belief that they are the result of individual effort alone, and they have evinced the concert of so many agents as to indicate concert of so many agents as to indicate an extension combination to screen from punishment. The irony of all ironies is that shortly following the ransacking of Mrs. Morgan's house by 3 Masons and the murder of her husband by 3 others, benevolent Freemasonry came to her financial aid. James Ganson, who was directly involved with the abduction of her husband, visited Mrs. Morgan, assuring her that Freemasonry was making arrangements for her support, that she would be well provided for, that her children would be sent to school as soon as they were old enough. After Freemasonry determined how they were going to care for Mrs. Morgan and her children, they appointed Thomas McCully to deliver the message. McCully, you recall, was one of the 3 Masons who had bullied their way into her house, ransacking it in their attempt to find the manuscript to her husband's book. McCully informed Mrs. Morgan that Freemasonry had raised support for her family and had provided board for them at a public tavern in the village. The tavern was the same at which her husband had been detained after his arrest. 6 months after the murder of her husband, Henry Brown of Batavia, who was Grand Commander of the Knights Templar at Leroy, New York, called on Mrs. Morgan and handed her a bag containing silver dollars that had been collected from the various lodges throughout the state. Her distress of mind and unprotected situation did not sway her to bow to their hypocritical benevolence. Without hesitation, she said, "I shall accept no assistance from the Masons." The ends of justice were defeated by the oath of Freemasonry, which came in conflict with the duty to society and to God, and succeeded in setting it aside. Gradually, the opposition to Masonry became more and more political, and the anti-Masonic Party was formed. Ooh, that sounds like a good idea. Confessions. The murder of William Morgan, confessed by the man who, with his own hands, pushed him out of the boat into Niagara River. The following account of that tragic scene is taken from a pamphlet entitled Confession of the Murder of William Morgan, as taken down by Dr. John L. Emery of Racine County, Wisconsin, in the summer of 1848 and now 1849, first given to the public. This confession was taken down as related by Henry L. Valence, who acknowledges himself to have been one of the 3 who were selected to make a final disposition of the ill-fated victim of Masonic vengeance. Ooh, they're vengeful, spiteful little bastards. This confession, it seems, was made to his physicians. I mean, the more I read about these people, the more I just fucking hate them. They're so fucking evil. They really, they say they believe in God. Why don't you read the 10 Commandments? Try following them, you fucking dummies. And no wonder you have so many people opposing you. Look what's happening. Everybody's opposing you because you're fucking evil. This confession, it seems, was made to his physicians, and in view of his approaching dissolution, and published after his decease. After committing that horrid deed, he was, as might well be expected, an unhappy man by day and by night. He was much like Cain, a fugitive and a vagabond. To use his own words, "Go where I would, or do what I would. It was impossible for me to throw off the consciousness of crime, if the mark of Cain was not upon me. The curse of the first murderer was, the bloodstain was upon my hands, it could not be washed out." He therefore commences his confession thus: "My last hour is approaching, and as the things of this world fade from my mental sight, I feel the necessity of making, as far as in my power lies, that atonement which every violator of the great law of right owes to his fellow men. In this violation of law, he says, I allude to the abduction and murder of the ill-fated William Morgan. He proceeds with an interesting narrative of the proceedings of the fraternity in reference to Morgan, while he was incarcerated in the magazine of Fort Niagara. I have room for a few extracts only, showing the final disposition of their alleged criminal activities. Many consultations were held, many plans proposed and discussed and rejected, at length being driven to the necessity of doing something immediately for fear of being exposed. It was resolved in a council of 8 that he must die, must be consigned to a confinement from which there is no possibility of escape, the grave. 3 of their number were to be selected by ballot to execute the deed. 8 pieces of paper were procured, 5 of which were to remain blank, while the letter D was written on the others. These pieces of paper were placed in a large box, from which each man was to draw one at the same moment. After drawing, we were all to separate, without looking at the paper that each held in his hand. So soon as we had arrived at certain distances from the place of rendezvous, the tickets were to be examined, and those who held blanks were to return instantly to their homes, and those who should hold marked tickets were to proceed to the fort at midnight, and there put Morgan to death, in such a manner as should seem to themselves most fitting. Mr. Valence was one of the 3 who drew the ballots on which was the signal letter. He returned to the fort, where he was joined by his 2 companions, who had drawn the death tickets. Arrangements were made immediately for executing the sentence passed upon their prisoner, which was to sink him in the river with weights. In hope, says Mr. Valence, that he and our crime alike would thus be buried beneath the waves. His part was to proceed to the magazine where Morgan was confined and announce to him his fate. Theirs was to procure a boat and weights with which to sink him. Morgan, on being informed of their proceedings against him, demanded by what authority they had condemned him, and who were his judges. He commenced wringing his hands and talking of his wife and children, the recollections of whom, in that awful hour, terribly affected him. His wife, he said, was young and inexperienced, and his children were but infants. What would become of them were he cut off? And are they even ignorant of his fate? What husband and father would not be terribly affected under such circumstances, to be cut off from among the living in this inhuman manner? Mr. V's comrades returned and informed him that they had procured the boat and weights, and that all things were in readiness on their part. Morgan was told that all his remonstrances were idle, that die he must, and that soon, even before the morning light. The feelings of the husband and father were still strong within him, and he continued to plead on behalf of his family. They gave him 1/2 hour to prepare for his inevitable fate. They retired from the magazine and left him. How Morgan passed that time, says Mr. Valence, I cannot tell, but everything was quiet as the tomb within. At the expiration of the allotted time, they entered the magazine, laid hold of their victim, bound his hands behind him, and placed a gag in his mouth. They then led him forth to execution. A short time, says this murderer, brought us to the boat, and we all entered it, Morgan being placed in the bow with himself, alongside of him. My comrades took the oars, and the boat was rapidly forced out into the river. The night was pitch black. We could scarcely see a yard before us, and therefore was the time admirably adapted to our hellish purpose. Having reached a proper distance from the shore, the oarsmen ceased their labors. The weights were all secured together by a strong cord, and another cord of equal strength, and of several yards in length, proceeded from that. This cord, says Mr. V., I took in my hand. Did not that hand tremble? And fastened it around the body of Morgan, just above his hips, using all my skill to make it fast, so that it would hold. Then, in a whisper, I bade the unhappy man to stand up, and after a momentary hesitation, he complied with my order. He stood close to the head of the boat, and there was just length enough of rope from his person to the weights to prevent any strain while he was standing. I then requested one of my associates to assist me in lifting the weights from the bottom to side of the boat, while the other steadied her from the stern. This was done, and as Morgan was standing with his back toward me, I approached him and gave him a strong push with both my hands, which were placed on the middle of his back. He fell forward, carrying the weights with him, and the waters closed over the mass. We remained quiet for 2 or 3 minutes, when my companions, without saying a word, resumed their places, and rowed the boat to the place from which they had taken it. They also kidnapped Mr. Miller, the publisher. Ooh, listen to that shit. There was another fucking honest person named Mr. Miller back then. But the citizens of Batavia, finding it out, pursued the kidnappers and finally rescued him. The courts of justice found themselves entirely unable to make any headway against the widespread conspiracy that was formed among Masons in respect to this matter. These are matters of record. It was found that they could do nothing with the courts, with the sheriffs, with the witnesses, or with the jurors, and all their efforts were for a time entirely impotent. Indeed, they never were able to prove the murder of Morgan and bring it home to the individuals who perpetrated it. But Mr. Morgan had published Freemasonry to the world. The greatest pains were taken by Masons to cover up the transaction, and as far as possible to deceive the public in regard to the fact that Mr. Morgan had published Masonry as it really is. Masons themselves, as is affirmed by the very best authority, published 2 spurious editions of Morgan's book, and circulated them as the true edition which Morgan had published. Yeah, they do that all the time. They write fake things and then say, hey, see, this is from 200 years ago. It's bullshit. These editions were designed to deceive Masons who had never seen Morgan's edition, and thus to enable them to say that it was not a true revelation of Masonry. In consequence of the publication of Morgan's book and the revelations that were made in regard to the kidnapping and murdering of Mr. Morgan, great numbers of Masons were led to consider the subject more fully than they had done, and the conscientious among them almost universally renounced Masonry altogether. I believe that about 2,000 lodges, as a consequence of these revelations, were suspended. That's wonderful. Legislatures investigate U.S. Masonry. Despite the fact that Masonry was active in America since 1730, it was not until disclosures in the Morgan affair almost 100 years later that the American people became acutely aware of the fraternity's secret work. When the public heard that one William Morgan, a Mason of Batavia, New York, allegedly had been murdered by members of the craft for disclosing its secrets, the outcry was so vehement and widespread that thousands of the brethren resigned from the fraternity. Legislatures of the states of New York, Massachusetts, and Pennsylvania initiated investigations into the secret operations of Freemasonry and developed testimony which was both amazing and frightening. The purported benevolent fraternity was revealed to be a state within a state and bound its adherents with the most gruesome and terrifying oaths. In the national elections of 1830, the anti-Masonic political party mustered 130,000 votes. The report of the New York State Senate Committee said of Freemasonry, "It comprises men of rank, wealth, office, and talents in power, and that almost every place where power is of any importance, it comprises among the other classes of the community to the lowest, in large numbers, and capable of being directed by the efforts of others so as to have the force of concert through the civilized world. They are distributed, too, with the means of knowing each other, and the means of keeping secret, and the means of cooperating, in the desk, in the legislative hall, on the bench, in every gathering of men of business, in every party of pleasure, in every enterprise of government, in every domestic circle, in peace and in war, among its enemies and friends, in one place as well as another. So powerful indeed is it at this time that it fears nothing from violence, either public or private, for it has every means to learn it in season, to counteract, defeat, and punish it." The report noted that there were approximately 30,000 Freemasons in the state of New York, about 1/4 of the eligible voting population. Yet they have held for 40 years 3/4 of all public offices in the state. Commenting on a situation which has endured through the years, the report addressed the attitude of the press as follows: "The public press, that mighty engine for good or for evil, has been, with a few honorable exceptions, silent as the grave. This self-proclaimed sentinel of freedom has felt the force of Masonic influence, or has been smitten with the rod of its power. The New York legislators said Masonic witnesses on the stand have sworn to facts, which in the opinion of bystanders were not credited by a single one of the hundreds of persons who were present. Moreover, grand juries, a majority of whom were Masons, omitted to find bills of indictment when there was proof before them of outrages not surpassed in grossness and indecency by any committed in the country since the first settlement." Media coverage from Britain. Freemasons must reveal justice system members. London. Judges, magistrates, police officers, crown prosecutors, probation officers, and prison staff will in future have to declare whether they're Freemasons, Jack Straw, the Home Secretary, announced Tuesday. He said he'll ask the United Grand Lodge to publish regional lists of Freemasons who work in the criminal justice system. If it refuses to cooperate, a register will be set up. Although the register will at first be voluntary, Straw said the government is prepared to change the law to force employees to declare their membership. Straw said the government wants to end allegations that a network of Freemasons operating in the police and judiciary is undermining justice. The Daily Telegraph, February 16, 1998. Masonic prison threat. Leaders are told to name names in scandal probe, by Gabby Hinsliff. The secret world of Freemasonry may be blown wide open after its leaders were ordered on pain of jail to name members who may be linked to miscarriages of justice. The leadership has refused to tell MPs whether dozens of policemen involved in scandals belong to the Brethren. They could face prison on a charge of contempt of Parliament unless they name names within 2 weeks after a Commons Committee took the rare step of invoking sweeping powers. The list of more than 170 names drawn up by MPs covers policemen, judges, and journalists involved in 3 areas: the case of the Birmingham Six, members of the notoriously corrupt and now disbanded West Midlands Serious Crime Squad, and 7 people involved in the Stalker inquiry into an alleged shoot-to-kill policy in Ulster. The order from the Home Affairs Committee followed 7 months of increasingly heated negotiation. It means any links between the secretive Masonic culture and alleged police conspiracies and cover-ups can be studied. The United Grand Lodge of Freemasons will see it as the thin end of the wedge for further intrusion into the hallowed secrets of their ancient society. There were scenes of high drama in Commons Committee Room 6 yesterday as the Lodge's Grand Secretary, Commander Michael Higham, persistently refused to match police names against Masonic records unless there were specific allegations. He denounced the inquiry as a fishing expedition to hunt out Masons. Well, I guess we know he's a guilty one. Keep protesting about it. MPs thought they had reached agreement on the issue with Commander Higham last November, when he admitted he had changed his mind, requiring extra conditions. The committee chairman, Labour MP Chris Mullen, warned he could be in contempt of Parliament. "We are the ones who will decide what the questions are," he said. "The decision for you is whether you will answer the question. We are reaching make up your mind time." Asked for a final time if he would provide the information, Commander Higham replied, "Not straight away, no." He added, "I hope you will accept that is no, but not in a contemptuous way." Mr. Mullen snapped, "That will be for Parliament to decide." He then abruptly brought the public hearing to a close. Commander Higham had argued that his members were largely decent chaps who had a right to privacy. Of the 96 names said to have been West Midlands Crime Squad members, his inquiries established that only 10 were potential matches for Masonic records, and there were doubts over a number of those. "There is a deep sense of anger at the slur on our integrity," he said. "We know we have got bad apples, jolly few of them. We do take action against them, but the rest of the ordinary Freemasonry are decent chaps." "Oh yeah, we believe you." Mr. Mullen said in a statement, "We are not alleging that there was a Masonic hand in any of these 3 events. We cannot come to a conclusion whether there was until we see who was a Mason. When we see, we will come to a conclusion. Like the courts, parliamentary committees can force witnesses to attend and give truthful, complete evidence as long as their line of questioning is proper. The last time anyone was jailed for contempt of Parliament was an MP called Bradlaugh in the 1880s, but the procedure has been invoked in more recent times by a committee against minors, leader Arthur Scargill. Last night, the Grand Lodge said it will respond to the order, to be delivered by the Sergeant-at-Arms within days, but has not yet decided what its response will be. If they do not obey in 14 days, the matter is referred to the Speaker of the Commons and has to be debated. If the House agrees, it is then referred to the Committee on Standards and Privileges to investigate. Ultimately, the House has the power to order that the offender be called before the bar of the House to apologize and explain, or that he be committed to jail until Parliament reopens in autumn. Grand Lodge Director of Communications, John Hamill, said, "We would not wish to be in contempt of Parliament. We are a law-abiding organization, not." Commander Higham said last night that the Grand Lodge would consult its ruling committee, but he did not rule out continuing to defy Parliament despite the threat of jail. £100,000 a year, guardian of the decent chap's secrets. Commander Michael Higham has been the public face of the Freemasons for 18 years. The 62-year-old retired naval officer holds the position of Grand Secretary and Grand Scribe Ezra of the United Grand Lodge of England, although he prefers to be called the Chief Executive. Twice married, he can claim some success in performing his main PR role of attempting to demystify the Brotherhood. But yesterday, even his no-nonsense charm was put under strain. He knows that, whatever the outcome, he's being forced to retire 3 years early after falling out with his superiors who may have felt he had become too powerful. His resignation letter, written under protest, has been personally accepted by the Duke of Kent, who as Grand Master is the most senior Mason. Commander Higham, who is on £100,000 a year salary, will receive a 6-figure payoff when he leaves in July. The 281-year-old movement has about 360,000 members in the UK. The organization is administered by its sovereign body, the Grand Lodge. Despite their charitable fundraising activities, Masons have always been the subject of suspicion due to their secretive practices and bizarre rituals. Famous Freemasons have included Sir Winston Churchill, Peter Sellers, and Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. MPs crusade to lift the lid. Chris Mullins is one of Parliament's most dedicated crusaders, best known for his pursuit of justice for the Birmingham Six. The hard-left MP for Sunderland, a journalist by trade who now writes thrillers, has had Freemasonry in his sights for at least 5 years. In 1992, he tried unsuccessfully to introduce a bill compelling all holders of public office to divulge membership of any secret societies. Last March, the Home Affairs Committee recommended disclosure of Masonic links for judges. This week, Jack Straw announced a register. Fear shuts out family. At last, a brave stance against the sinister influence of Freemasonry in Britain. Chris Mullin, MP, deserves praise for doggedly pursuing this elusive, secretive, sinister society. Masons always justify their secrecy by bleating about their good works and the money raised for good causes. But the secrecy angle is more than just keeping things confidential. It includes an element of fear. They say their gruesome rituals are tradition with no violent intent, but even with 360,000 members, nobody spills the beans. What sort of stranglehold prevents 360,000 men imparting their secrets even to wives, brothers, sons, or friends? My father-in-law, a recorder in Portsmouth Dockyard, was told any promotion he expected would halt if he didn't join the Square and Compass. My cousin and personal friends in Prudential Insurance and in the local police force have been told the same. Last week, I overheard 2 local bobbies complaining of just that. Law Chief warns Masonic judges. The Lord Chancellor yesterday put an arm lock on judges who refuse to say whether or not they are Freemasons. Lord Irvine warned that they will be marked down in a new public register as not prepared to provide information, a category that will persuade many critics that they are in fact Masons. The move follows months of struggle between the government and the Freemasons and among ministers themselves. Home Secretary Jack Straw's determination to make Masons go public has triumphed over Lord Irvine's reluctance. The new register of the Masonic links of judges will be the first to cover any group of civil servants or other state employees. Leading Freemasons condemned the move as discriminatory. They said it was unfair to single out judges rather than others involved in the justice system. The pressure for judges and other people in sensitive public jobs to declare their status intensified early this year after the United Grand Lodge refused to give names of its members among the judiciary, the police, government lawyers, prison, and probation staff to the Home Affairs Select Committee. Mr. Straw warned that the government would set up a register if the lodge continued to refuse to identify them. At the same time, declaration of Masonic status was made compulsory for newly appointed judges. The Lord Chancellor announced the new move in a letter to Lord Chief Justice Lord Bingham. He said he did not believe judges had ever been influenced by Masonic membership. That's a lie. But added, "There's a level of public concern on this issue which could serve to undermine public confidence in our justice system. This must be avoided if at all possible." Probe into hospital Masonic links. Allegations that a ring of Freemasons was partly to blame for the Bristol scandal are to be investigated later this month. Britain's biggest public inquiry into a health service failure will examine claims that Masonic friendships set off a culture of complacency, allowing surgery to continue despite appalling risks. If the inquiry concludes that the Brotherhood's activities led to poor scrutiny of underperforming staff, there will be an outcry. Health Secretary Frank Dobson is aware of the claims and is said to be threatening tough action if the inquiry supports them. It could mean ordering all surgeons and senior hospital administrators to declare memberships of the society. See that? They want to see if all the surgeons in the hospitals are Freemasons. I mean, you don't want no Freemason as a surgeon. The Labour government has already put pressure on Freemasons within the judicial system to declare their membership following concern that Masons who swear allegiance to fellow members have been involved in cover-ups and corruption. Yeah, no kidding. The doctor who blew the whistle on the Bristol scandal said last night that he believed Freemasons may have contributed to the failures. Consultant anesthetist Dr. Stephen Bolson, who has started a new life in Australia after being frozen out by his former colleagues, said Masonic alliances were rife at the hospital. Hear that shit? You're not even safe at the hospital with these evil bastards in there. He said, I suspect that involvement in Freemasonry helped to prolong the loss of life and led directly to the children's death. Man, I don't know how people aren't going fucking nuts over this shit. Quite a few of my colleagues were Freemasons, and a lot of Bristol people were concerned that Freemasonry was at the heart of the problem. The inquiry, which will open on October 27th and be led by Professor Ian Kennedy, will focus on cardiac surgery on children from 1984 to 1995. That's 11 years. It will assess whether hospital managers and the Department of Health acted quickly enough after discovering the problem, and it will make recommendations to avoid a repeat of the tragedy. Labour MP Chris Mullen, chairman of the Commons Home Affairs Committee, said any involvement of Freemasons should be made public. It would be right for the inquiry to ask about the involvement of Masons in the tragedy and then to decide whether their membership was relevant to what happened. 3 doctors were disciplined in June. Trust Chief Executive John Rowlands and Surgeon James Weishart were struck off, and Janadarn Dasmana was banned from operating on children for 3 years. How about just for life? More than 1,000 male JPs in England and Wales have admitted to being Freemasons, it was revealed yesterday. JPs, that must be a general practitioner. General practitioner. So it says more than 1,000 male general practitioners in England and Wales have admitted to being Freemasons. So 1,000 male doctors. So you might want to get a female doctor, guys. Female surgeon. Nearly 14% of those who replied to a government inquiry said they were members of the secretive brotherhood, according to the Lord Chancellor. But another 867 had refused to respond to the voluntary survey into the activities and the scope of the society. The figures compare to nationwide statistics that show 400,000 men are members of various lodges, less than 2% of all Britain's males. A cross-party Commons committee yesterday expressed concern that the large proportion of men delivering summary justice in England and Wales were Masons. Lord Irvine told the Home Affairs Committee that the 26,000 general practitioners serving throughout most of England and Wales, 15,926, or 61% of the total, had responded to the survey launched by the government earlier in the year. So far, 1,097 general JPs, I think that's general practitioners. Maybe I got that wrong. It's an abbreviation JP. I might have made a mistake there. That is 6.8% of the total responses. Yeah, what's a JP? I don't even know. I might have screwed that up. Have declared they are Freemasons, while 13,962, or 87%, have declared that they are not, he said. A further 867, or 5.4%, of respondents were unwilling to make a declaration, while another 2,036 have not yet answered the voluntary survey. However, since about half of JPs are women, what's a JP? I don't know. JP? The 6.8% who have declared themselves Masons effectively translated into 13.6% of male JPs. Lord Irvine said a similar survey among judges revealed that 247 out of 5,000 who have responded to a questionnaire, or 4.9%, said they were Masons. He repudiated committee members who inferred that those who had refused to make declarations were Freemasons. Some are refusing to make a declaration on grounds of conscience. I would not begin to infer that they are members, he said. And he admitted that the survey, instigated by himself and Home Secretary Jack Straw, had stirred up something of a hornet's nest through the judiciary. It has already been vehemently opposed by 2 of the 12 law lords, the most senior judges in the country. Yeah, they're probably Masons themselves. And the Master of the Rolls, Lord Wolfe, who is understood to have made private representations to Lord Irvine. There is no doubt at all that there is a very, very considerable resentment, he told the MPs, but added, I certainly do not regard it as my job never to tread on judicial toes. The voluntary register of the judiciary should be available in the new year, when the full results of the survey of judges and JPs will be completed. Okay. JP has something to do with the law. Lord Irvine justified the investigation, saying it would provide the public with the chance to know whether a judge or magistrate they appear before is a Mason. However, he rejected the idea that a genuine conflict of interest was likely to arise in the case of judges, as, under their judicial code, they would know of any difficulty before the case began. Ministers hope the register will ultimately cover everybody working in the criminal justice system, including police officers, prison officers, and probation and Crown Prosecution Service staff. It was recently revealed that the inquiry had led to a series of resignations from the Brotherhood, which has the Duke of Kent as its Grand Master. The United Grand Lodge of England said 40 members, mostly police officers and local government officials, had quit, claiming their careers would suffer if they were identified. Many others are believed to have quit for personal reasons. Yeah, and that's what I recommend to all you other Freemasons out there right now. I recommend you walk away and resign from Freemasonry if you know what's good for you. Freemasons furious at recruitment ban in the armed forces. Angry Freemasons have accused Tony Blair of discriminating against them after a crackdown on the secret society in the armed forces. The Ministry of Defense has issued an official order banning the Masons from staging meetings on MOD premises. And the Defense Council instruction says serving personnel should not encourage or promote membership among their colleagues in case it has a destabilizing influence on the chain of command. The Duke of Kent, who, as Grand Master of the United Grand Lodge of England, is the most senior of the nation's 320,000 Masons, is said to be furious and disappointed over the crackdown. Masonic insiders claim the MOD order is part of government-backed moves to remove the Masonic movement from every part of public life, including the civil service, police, local government, the law, and medicine. Well, this sounds like exactly what we need to do. You guys should start pressuring the politicians. We got to remove Masonry from all those things. The MOD order has been snubbed, however, by the 40 Masonic lodges which meet regularly at the Duke of York's barracks in Chelsea, West London. It is the only MOD premises where such meetings are held. Each Mason attending pays £5 per head, plus the cost of dinner and drinks at lodge meetings, held 4 times a year. They also hold regular training and instruction meetings. Although the famous barracks are MOD property, they are on land owned by the Earl of Cadogan, a leading Freemason, so it would be impossible for the ban to be imposed there anyway. The row began last summer when the MOD itself, said to employ thousands of Freemasons, issued the order. Writing on behalf of the Duke of Kent at the time, the United Grand Lodge's Pro-Grand Master, Lord Farnham, said the instruction was discriminatory and implied Freemasons could not be trusted, and requested the instruction be dropped. But in January, Defense Secretary Jeff Hoon made it clear the order would not be withdrawn. Lord Farnham said last night that Freemasons everywhere were saddened by the order. Thousands had served in the armed forces over the past 300 years, many of them giving their lives, he added. Changing Masonic strategies. When faced with claims that Freemasonry is a secret society, Masonic authorities respond by stating, "We are not a secret society, but a society that has secrets." Questioned about their use of the inverted pentagram, a symbol of Satanism used by the Order of the Eastern Star, displayed on many lodges and temples, Masonic authorities state, "While once representing a symbol of evil, we have redeemed it by our good works." Oh, sure you have. Over the past few decades, as more Masons began to learn the truth, many left the Masonic fraternity and its affiliations, resulting in a drastic membership decline. Good people, when in possession of truth, will disavow allegiance to darkness. With Masonic power and influence being threatened, Masonic authorities are finding new strategies to recruit members. Up until recently, it was against Masonic policy to solicit new members. A person interested in becoming a member would have to approach a Mason, and then the process could begin. The Masonic Lodge now actively recruits through media outlets, with advertising, proclaiming charitable functions, etc. In Great Britain, Masonic authorities were faced with public exposure of the blood oaths taken during the initiation rites of the lower degrees. They responded by removing these blood oaths to appear friendlier to the public and prospective members. This same strategy has begun to occur in North America and other countries where membership has declined. Currently in North America, and probably elsewhere, a new strategy has emerged. Traditionally, it could easily take more than a year for a newly initiated entered apprentice Mason to pass the first 3 degrees to become a Master Mason. In some Masonic constituencies, this process has been reduced to a single day. These are only a few of the changing Masonic policies and strategies being implemented to meet new challenges. One change has occurred. It can accuse ex-Masons and others of spreading falsehood. Sometimes falsehood is promoted by Masonic authorities themselves, then blamed on opponents to discredit their testimony. It will use threat and violence whenever possible to silence truth. Not only is Freemasonry a secret society keeping secrets from the public, but it also does so with its own members. Each ascending degree is secret to those Masons below. This manual has been produced to reveal hidden agendas to Masons and prospective members so that they can make informed decisions based on truth rather than deception. Okay guys, that's the video. Thanks for watching. Until next time, peace.